Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheels are off the ground and the suspension is hanging. After that, remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that the wheel's out of the way, we have a nice clear view of our rear shock. Down along the bottom here is where it's going to connect onto the control arm. There's going to be 2 10mm headed bolts. Before I go ahead and start removing those, I'm going to apply a little bit of upward pressure under this just to kind of support it. Now we can start removing our 2 10mm headed bolts. They come through from the bottom facing up. You can see the tops of them. For ours, one of them's broken. I'm going to go ahead and remove the other. Once you have your bolts out of there, give them a quick inspection. Make sure they're still reusable. If not, grab yourself some new ones. Now we can go ahead and lower down our support and get that out of the way. After that, go ahead and get inside the trunk of the vehicle so we can access the top. From inside the trunk, we're going to make our way to the side carpeting. Just carefully grab onto that. We're going to pull it towards the rear, and then we're going to expose this area. After that, go ahead and grab onto this rubber insulator here. It's essentially just a sound dampener. We can set that aside. Now we're going to go ahead and remove our 2 mounting nuts. There's one right here and one over on the other side. You do not need to touch this center nut at this moment. Now we can start removing our 13mm headed mounting nuts. To do this, I'm going to loosen this first one closest to me all the way up to the top, but leave it on a couple threads. We'll fully remove the other one, reach inside the wheel well, hold onto that shock, and then we can fully remove this last nut. Now I'm going to grab that shock, lift it up, fully remove that nut, and pull the shock out through the wheel well. There it is, friends. All right, so let's start taking apart our brand new shock assembly here so we can start preparing to install it. And take everything off of here. We have our top washer, the mount, and then the lower washer. Set all that aside. It's time to start putting together our rear shock. Before we do anything with this one, let's have a quick look at the original. Looking at the very top of it, where the mount is, if you were to look closely at it, what you're going to see is it's a little bit oblonged. Kind of has an area that protrudes out a little bit further than the other side. What you want to pay attention to is the fact of which way this is facing and the fact that the mounting bolts for this, or the studs, are pretty much the opposite as the other end. So essentially they're going to make an X. Now with that said, we can set this one aside and get to work on the new one. Let's start putting this together, starting with the larger washer. We'll take this, slide it right on over that shaft. After that, we're going to start putting on the mount. Having a look at the new one, you can see that it has that same protrusion that comes out a little bit further. Make sure you have that in the same position. Once again, we're making an X with the mounting points. Grab that top washer, slide it right over it. Time for the brand new locking nut. We'll start that on. If it doesn't feel like it wants to slide on, just go ahead and take it like this. Carefully press it down a little bit and it should want to start. On. Now that I have it started, I'm going to make my X here, and now we can start tightening up this nut. Once you have this bottomed out, torque this to 15 foot-pounds. To torque this, you might notice that it wants to spin on you. If that's the case, just use a pry bar coming in between the stud and the mount and snug it up. Let's just make sure we're making an X. If not, you can just go ahead and spin it a little bit until it looks like it's aligned perfectly. Now let's have a look at the bottom of our original shock. What you're going to notice is you have these mounting clips. Typically, you're going to want to reuse these or replace them. If you're going to be reusing them, just carefully get underneath this area, gently pry, and then remove it from the shock. Once that's off of there, just give it a quick inspection. Make sure it's still reusable. For me personally, I typically replace these. Now we can put on our clips, paying attention to this area right here. You can see it has a bobble that comes down. That's the threaded area. So with that said, the bolts for these come through from the bottom facing up. So you want to make sure you have that threaded area along the top, facing towards the rest of the shock. We'll just go ahead and slide this into position. Typically you can grab onto it and slide it right on. If you want to use some pliers, go ahead and do that. Make sure that hole's lined up. Do the same thing to the other ear, and then we can get ready to get this in the vehicle. Remove these nuts. Now we're going to pay attention to the top mounting. We have that bobbled area. That's going to be facing towards the center of the vehicle, so facing inboard. Now we can take this, we'll slide it into position, reach up into the trunk, and go ahead and install both of those mounting nuts. You want to make sure you have this upper protector on here. This is also going to help make sure that the shock is secured in the body. Start on both of your mounting nuts. Once they're both started, snug them up and torque these to 15 foot-pounds as well. Now let's have a look at the lower mounting point for the shock. Looking at this, you can tell that it's not necessarily parallel to the ground or straight across. It kind of goes a little bit at an angle. Also, if you were to look at the control arm where it needs to mount onto, it's also sitting at an angle. Essentially, you just want to match up those angles so they're in the proper position. Now we can go ahead and start jacking up this lower control arm here until it matches up. We'll start in both of our mounting bolts, snug them up. I like to use red thread locker. We'll call it your prerogative. There's one bolt. We'll do the same to the other. Let's start snugging them up. All right. Now we'll just make sure they're tight. Now we can torque each of these mounting bolts to 18 foot-pounds. Once you have everything tightened, go ahead and lower your suspension. Now once you're sure everything looks good, let's get our wheel back up on here. Now we can start on all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts. We'll bottom this out, get the wheel back on the ground. We'll torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely on the ground, let's go ahead and torque these to 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friends, we got the car back together. What's left to do now? Now of course, whenever you do a rear shock, you always want to make sure you do them as a pair. So do the exact same thing on the other side of the vehicle. Aside from that, you need to make sure you get a 4-wheel alignment after this. So go ahead and safely take it for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.